Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. We honor creators, and today we have with us Clair Barrus. Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Ron, Masterpiece Theater, is helping me co-host today. Thanks, Ron. And so I'm at Clair at Sunstone, I think 2.5 years ago, and he looked very distinguished. He was carrying some poster things or something. And I said, "Are you important?" And he said, "Of course." No, he didn't say that. But I took his picture and we became Facebook friends. And then later on, I found out the different things that he has presented at Sunstone and the different interests that he has. And so I thought we'd bring him on, especially since Clair has been sort of involved in, we'll say, internet Mormonism, right? You've been there from the beginning.
I go way back.
He was standing next to Al Gore when Al Gore invented the internet, is what I remember.
I remember when he was on. He's the first one to send an email, I think. Yes.
Is that what it was?
No, I'm making
whatever it was. It was made up, just like George Washington chopping down the cherry tree, right?
That's not real.
That's right.
Dang it.
And I remember somebody saying Abraham Lincoln walked like 6 miles to return 1 penny change to somebody when he was a clerk at a store. And that's why he's Honest Abe. And that's why he's on the penny. And I don't know. I don't think that's a real story. But people like to say, here's how honest my guy is. He would walk 6 miles to return a penny. Here's how great of a guy George Washington is. Here's what he would do. He could not lie, right?
And we have our legends, and then we have our realities, right?
Right. Yeah.
Maybe, Jesus didn't really walk on water. Maybe just somebody said in Greece 200 years later, my guy, Jesus, is so good, he probably could walk on water. And so they wrote a story about it. That could be. But anyhow, Clair, tell us a little bit about your upbringing, we'll say through high school.
Yeah, sure. I was born in Idaho Falls, Idaho, and raised in a pretty traditional LDS home. And my dad had been inactive, but he became active when they started having kids. And other than that, we were pretty, went to all our meetings and were really immersed into the church. And I had a phenomenal experience growing up in the church. As I look back, the Ward family that we had that was tremendously invested in the youth was really good, and I think that's one of the I consider that a huge positive and a great influence on my life. So
do you remember? Do you remember fundraising activities by the Relief Society?
Yes, bazaars. Have the Ward Bazaar, and they sell quilts and blankets and brownies and what have you. Yes, absolutely.
I remember thinking that calling it a bazaar instead of like a Ward market or what became later like flea markets or something like that was kind of interesting. Like, why would we use that, Aladdin era, type of terminology for an event?
Yeah,
I don't know where it comes from.
Mormon culture is kind of evaporating, and we keep getting rid of things, but it was, I don't know, it was kind of cool, just a little quaint perhaps at times, but it really worked, it really worked.
And did you guys do road shows?
Yep, road shows. We did it all. Golden Green Ball, danced, tons of service projects, helping the widows. Yeah, and church was busy. So I went to priesthood meeting at 7:30 in the morning, came home at 9, waited for an hour. Then we went back to Sunday school, which was at 10. We had singing practice for like 20 minutes. Then we went to Sunday school, which was an hour-long class. Then we went home for a few hours, and me and my sisters would bike ride way far away from the house to try to escape sacrament meeting, which was in the evenings, 5 to 6:30. And sometimes we get away with that. Sometimes our parents would find us. But it was an all-day thing. And then Monday was family home evening. Tuesday was young men, young women's. We called it mutual. Wednesdays was primary. Thursday was Relief Society, I think at 10 o'clock in the morning. And then Fridays oftentimes would be like a bazaar, the ward bazaar or dinner. Saturdays, oftentimes there'd be a service project or some kind of a youth activity, and then start all over again. And it was completely immersive.
Wow.
That's life, total life. Yep. And
right.
It was good.
So much.
Good. Yeah.
Now there's so much church, they're thinking about just doing 1 hour on Sunday.
Yes. Yep. It's interesting how things have changed. Yes.
Yeah. And so you were in the deacons quorum. Like, did you do leadership, or were there just so many boys you didn't have much opportunity?
Yeah, I was an extremely shy 12-year-old who became the deacon president. And I just was mortified standing up there and having someone say the prayer. But it was introduction to leadership is what, that's what the goal was, is to get us learn about leadership. So.
Did you have any foundational testimony experiences in your youth?
No, not really. I just grew up believing because we all believed, and I just assumed that was the way it was. And I didn't have any tremendous revelatory experiences. I did have some experiences that were kind of scary. So this is maybe a negative of the time. In primary, we were taught that Satan or evil spirits can possess you. And if you are being possessed, you can raise your arm to the square and command the devil to leave in the name of Jesus Christ. And I believed that. And at nighttime, I would wake up and I'd hear a sound in my room. I'd just be terrified, shivering under my covers, and I'd raise my arm to the square. And I don't think it's wise to teach that to primary children.
Yeah,
because it just scared the frickin' tar out of me.
Then you become a deacon.
Yeah.
You find out that you have more priesthood power in your pinky than the Pope does.
Yes, that is correct. So I was a believer, even though I don't remember having some remarkable spiritual experience, or at least, well, and here's another thing that was interesting. I used to, I would, in sacrament meeting, we'd be up on the stand because we'd prepared the sacrament. And as I didn't realize at the time what was going on, but I would look out and I would see what appeared to be auras over everybody, over their heads, different colored auras. And I thought that I could see their spirits. Well, later I realized that, if you stare at a light and then you shift your eye to a dark area, you can see the same auras. But I had interpreted in my spiritual worldview that I was seeing, not only that, but I thought I could see the buildings in the spirit world and so forth. So I was, I really, I had a testimony, but not an experience.
Okay.
Yeah, and I interpreted things like that.
Right.
And then once you have the priesthood, you learn about how to tell the difference between a good angel and a bad angel you could offer to shake their hand.
Yep. That scared me. But I never had that experience. Fortunately, that would have just terrified me also. But yeah.
Only recently I realized that in the first vision stories, in none of those does Joseph offer his hand out to Jesus or God.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's right.
How does he know if they were really who they represented to be?
I've talked to a couple of people that claim to have heavenly visions, and none of them have shaken hands, and I've been disappointed in them. It's like this as a teenager, this is what you prepare for. You're like, okay, I've read the story, I've read the DNC, I'm ready to shake hands as soon as
you're trained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But these guys, the ones that I see it, I never tried it that I've run into. So maybe there's someone out there that has, but I haven't run into anyone that has.
Were there stalwarts in your ward, Claire, that were good examples, that were like champions of doing the right thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I look back at some of the bishops I had during my youth, and I just admire them. They were good, just good people, salt of the earth, do anything to help out, dedicated all of their time. And yeah, just good people, really good people. Yep.
And so when you were in high school, did you have subjects that you were fond of? And were you thinking that you were preparing for college and stuff like that?
Well, I was kind of a dumb kid. I didn't learn well, but in high school, I did find and discover at our high school that we had computers there. It was actually a modem connected to the district. It was a PDP-11 computer, and I had no idea that computers were available to people. And I was a huge Trekkie growing up, and in fact, the Star Trek worldview probably influenced me as much as the church did. I lived and breathed that, and I bought it. I accepted that positive view of humanity, that it would, you know, I don't know if I have that optimism now, but but I did. I have, and anyway, I love technology, and that my brain lit on fire, and I became obsessed with computers, and that was my field. I became an information technology person. That's my profession.
Did you believe the rumors that Gene Roddenberry was Mormon?
I did not hear those, and I
Okay.
don't think I would have. I think I would have rejected it.
Okay. And
But
so,
yeah, that's the youth. Yeah,
did you go see the computer that the district had ever, like a field trip?
yeah. I took a I took a course. Actually, took a course, and we would work on the computer. It was awesome. It was right down to the nuts and bolts. So there were toggle switches on the front of the computer and lights, and that was the lights were your output, and the toggle switches were your input. And you'd
Was there a
plug
tape
in
drive?
bytes. Yep. They'd have tape drives, and you would toggle in and do programming, machine language. It was down to the very lowest level. Such a great introductory course, because I understood computers from literally what was going on inside them, which was a great opportunity.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm a big Unix Linux person in history, and the PDP-11 was right where the Unix was first developed on. So
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I live and breathe Linux, Unix, and I actually have dreams in some Unix stuff, actually, which is kind of weird. But good. I'm glad to know that. I didn't realize that, but we share a commonality there. That's great.
And so you had release time seminary, and you were preparing for a mission?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, and I was reluctant to go on a mission. I just was scared of the whole. Just terrified me. But at some point, I thought, my friends are going. I guess I'll go. And so that was my motivation. Is I would look foolish if I didn't go. That was just me. But I went, and actually, it was a great experience. My mission was I did a lot of growing up there, a lot of maturing, and it was a good experience for me. And I had some really. I went to the deep south, to the area in and around Houston. So it's kind of the southeast Texas. And that was so. There's a couple of things. I went in 1978, and of course, in June of '78, the church, Spencer Kimball, president of the church at the time, announced the revelation allowing blacks to have the priesthood, and as kind of also it gave them temple access, all black people temple access. And I went on my mission, and at some point I got transferred to an area that was 10% white. There was a little white area in the upper corner, and all the rest was black. It was South Houston, and as we attracted everybody to say, "You guys were here like a month ago. Why do you keep coming?" Everywhere we went, people would say, "You guys, why are you here again?" And we got very frustrated, and so we decided, let's go out into the black area and check out some Temple Square referrals. Now there were rules that had been handed down word of mouth, and the rule was that you do not actively proselyte black people, but if they reach out to you, then it's okay to teach them. Well, we went out, checked out a Temple Square referral, and then we decided to track the street, and we had the most success in tracting that I've ever had. We got in every other door and taught and got follow-up appointments, and it was stunningly remarkable for our mission, for what was our experience. We had never had that success. It wasn't long until we were teaching between 12 to 15 lessons a day, and it was crazy. And it was a half-hour drive to get to this part of our area. It was a long ways away. So we had a new mission president. He came and he got hepatitis, and he was in the hospital for 3 months. The mission was on autopilot, and so there was no one to ask, can we move? Is that okay? So we just moved and we had no white neighbors at all. We were the only white people. Sometimes we'd go for 3 days without seeing another white person, and we picked up accents, this Southern black accent. And when we'd go to zone conference, the other missionaries would like, "Why are you guys talking like that?" We didn't realize that, but we were totally immersed in this, and we had remarkable success, and we began bringing black people to church. Now we got pushback in the ward. We had for example, our ward mission leader, I won't go into detail, but really said he was very unhappy that we were proselyting black people. And, so this is the beginning of my social development, becoming progressive in my thinking. I and my companion, we decided, you know what? We're going to proselyte black people, and they deserve the gospel, and this idea that they should be excluded. Too bad. You're just going to have to get used to it. That was our attitude. So we brought some people into the church, and when we got transferred out, they ended up transferring 3 sets of missionaries in to that area, and the area just blossomed. So that was and just to give you an example, when I grew up in high school, I had seen one black person in my life, and it was somebody had moved into Idaho Falls, and there was a kid that was black that came to high school. So I grew up in very white, very white and very sheltered environment. So that was an exciting thing, and ever since then I have been more progressive in my thinking about the rights of people, that we should strive for equality, and so that was an important milestone in my thinking. Now, another thing that was influential on my mission is that we were in the Bible Belt, and you would knock on a door, and they would oftentimes be very prepared to debate Mormon missionaries, and I learned later that there were circuits of professional anti-Mormon preachers that would go from church to church to church and educate Southern Baptists primarily, but others, about these Mormons this cult, and what do you ask Mormon missionaries when they come to your door? And over time, I learned the very first experience with that there was maybe another way of looking at things from my very sheltered growing up, is that we knocked on a door, and this is in my first area, and it was a preacher, and he said, "Do you guys speak in tongues, or do you take up serpents and you're not harmed? Do you have signs that follow you?" And I was like, "What is he talking about? I'd never heard any of this." And he said, "When you go home, look up these verses." He said, "If you're true ministers of the gospel, you'll be speaking in tongues, and you can take up a serpent; it'll bite you, it won't hurt you." And so I went home and I looked it up, and he was right. I'm like, "What? I never learned about this, and why don't?" And so I started thinking, for the first time, uh, and we've all had those experiences the first time we start run across something that we don't understand, and we start thinking about it. Well, over time, I researched ways to combat. I became an apologist, I guess. And so I came up with all these verses to counteract what people would commonly throw at us. And I wrote it all down. I made an index of all this information, and I put some pages in my Bible so that I was prepared whenever we go to a door, and I could always respond and counteract whatever was thrown at us. And we would have practice.
There's like two different levels of apologists, right? In a way, not levels, but maybe factions or something. One is to counteract the anti-Mormon lies, and the other is to explain theology, right? And defend the theology.
Yeah, and this was to counteract, because that's all I was hearing, anti-Mormon attacks. And so I developed scriptural responses. So they would say, Joseph Smith would not have lived if he saw God, because it says in some verse that no man can see God and live. So then I would have a verse where Moses saw God, and he obviously survived. And so I had all these anecdotes to the attacks,
Nice.
And then we would practice debating, or we called it bashing.
Bashing. Yep.
As missionaries, and I just was a natural at this. So I could be the Catholic and somebody else be the Mormon, or I would say, "What do you want to be?" And I'll be the other one, and I would always win. I just had a natural ability, and we all have things we're born with, good things that we become good at later that we don't know. And this kind of was one of those things that I was good at. It was my initial, I guess, introduction to thinking deeply about the church. And
so you're saying that you would have been a really good Catholic.
I could have defended Catholic doctrine or Mormon doctrine, at least superficially. I didn't really understand what was going on, but I could find verses that seemed to, counter. So those were two things that were influential in my mission.
Did you find any books that would help you? So like when I was a missionary, we had a book called The Missionary Pal. It was like a small little black book with a lot of bashing verses like that. We called it our little bashing Bible.
Oh, I haven't seen that. We had one called The Day of Defense, and it was very well. It was really good. It's really good. And so I poured through that and extracted everything out of that was useful. So yes.
I saw a little pamphlet thing that was entitled Mr. Durant of Salt Lake City. And that had an elder traveling in the South, and everything was like proper, after dinner, people would go to the other room, the library, to have conversations, and they'd set up rules for the conversations. And they decided to talk Bible, and he would say some like claim, and then people would say, "Oh, well, why would you say that? It's not in the Bible." And he would open up the Bible and show them where those claims.
Oh, right.
And it was like after the second day, somebody came back and said, "I have information. All right, Mr. Durant has been deceptive to us. He didn't tell us that he was Mormon." And then Mr. Durant would say, "Well, nobody asked, right? What's your denomination? You didn't tell us, you were Baptist or whatever, right?" And so it goes through all those things. And it was like a good Bible-only presentation of the gospel. And my assumption is that is what missionaries did in the late 1800s. And it wasn't until the 1900s where they started talking first vision and other Joseph Smith's the prophet kind of a thing. It was more about the theology using the Bible. That's what my understanding is.
Yeah.
And so did you learn new things around that?
Well, I began my initial, I started to learn, I mean, as you grow older and you have foundations, layers of knowledge that you've accumulated, you can think a lot better about things and what they mean. But at that point, I was just such a novice. All I knew is I could defend the church and with these verses, and I had no concept of the complexity of the Bible, you know. But I would later dive into more into the Bible studies, and at BYU. The next, next thing I guess we'll talk about is probably at BYU. So I finished my mission and I went to BYU, and there one of the things I did is I took biblical Hebrew. I took 12 credits and dove into that, and it was really difficult, but it was very rewarding, and I still feel the benefits of that information and that knowledge. In fact, we have a small group of us in my ward have a Bible study group that we meet weekly, and we have a ball nerding out over over the Old Testament and all the weird, strange, curious, cool aspects that are in there, and we love doing that. And I took some Middle Eastern studies courses, and I thought about becoming, studying to become a seminary teacher, but I ended up sticking with computer science. In retrospect, that was a good move, So I that was my field. I would also I took some church history courses at BYU and started diving into that. So I discovered that there was what's the Joseph Smith collection on microfilm, and it had such cool stuff that I had never heard of before. So they had in that microfilm collection, they had a section called Revelations Not in the Doctrine and Covenants. I'm like, what? There's other revelations, and so I read like for example, the Sarah and Whitney marriage revelation, which is so far out compared to what I had ever known, and other things like that. And I became obsessed with that stuff. So when Christmas vacation would come, I would stay a couple of extra days, and I'd just spend my time in this special collections. And then I would come home, and then I'd come back to college a day or two early from Christmas vacation and do the same thing, try to research and study and learn and try to take all of this stuff in. So those were important points in my intellectual formation, an obsession with church history and trying to understand the church as deeply as I could.
So in your history classes, were they teaching anything about Joseph Smith's polygamy, or is that just something you learned going through the collections?
I don't remember. I took 2 church history classes. They were introductory courses, and I don't recall being taught about that. That's a good question. I may have been taught it, but I don't have any recollection of hearing that. It may not have even. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I've got a church history Summit Institute book from the 90s, and there's 2 sentences in there that explain all of Joseph Smith's polygamy.
Oh,
that's all I've got.
That's actually, that's something, because I remember when in priesthood curriculum within the past maybe 15 years ago, they came out with where every year you'd study a prophet for the year, and they came out with Joseph Smith manual, and in the introduction, which nobody reads, they had a short paragraph that mentioned that Joseph Smith was a polygamist. And and as far as I could tell, that was the first printed reference that I had ever come across in the modern day church that mentioned that Joseph Smith was a polygamist, and we all know, of course, that the church and all institutions do this. They take the maybe the path of least resistance, that they get the most bang for the buck. And our church at some point, it just was not beneficial to talk about Joseph Smith's polygamy because it's controversial. So it dropped out of the consciousness of the church at some point. I don't know what point it was, but I don't think anybody knew, or very few people knew, that Joseph Smith was a polygamist. And it's only been
what used to be milk before the meat just became a meatless diet.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. And there were some good manuals, I think, Lowell Benyon wrote some manuals. I think Obert C. Tanner and Sterling McMurrin had helped. And I think, though, they probably stretched more into meat area and probably had some more depth. But the manuals became, I learned quite some time ago that when you had a Sunday school lesson and it says read Genesis chapters 2, 3, 5, and 6, I would read chapter 4 first, because I'm like, what do they want me to skip? Right. And why? That's just me. I want to know everything. I don't, that's my personality. Don't hide stuff from me. I want to learn it and assimilate it and deal with it, So.
And who is Dwayne Crowther?
Dwayne Crowther, yes. So Dwayne Crowther was an author that was popular back in the, I don't know, 70s, 80s, 90s. And there was a rumor at BYU that went around that he had written a book and that the brethren had asked him not to publish it. And I'm like, I got to figure that out. Right? And same thing.
Yep. I have a couple of his books, I think.
It's full of Genesis 4 things.
Yeah, it's the Genesis 4 phenomena. And so I couldn't find the book. I couldn't figure anything. This is before you could get on the internet and look stuff up. But I did find in special, he had a master's thesis. And so at BYU. And so I had to get special permission to access both his thesis and the Joseph Smith collection. But I was able to get that. And so I started going through his thesis, which was on the second coming. And I would read stuff, and it would say, well, in the Times and Season, Orson Pratt said this. So I'd find that volume of the Times and Season, then I'd photocopy it and put it in my folder. And I just started collecting stuff, because I wanted to wrap my head around it. I had no concept at the time. Church history is a big, messy, broad thing, as you all know, and it's not a simple thing to assimilate over a weekend or even a couple of weeks of research. It takes a lot more than that. So that was the beginnings. Also, another thing that my obsession began. Yeah. So I went through BYU and did all that, and then I graduated and I got a job at Sperry, which merged with another company and became Unisys, and they had the internet, which, well, actually it was called the ARPANET. Right. This was in 80. I started working there in 86, and so but I'd actually done a summer internship 2 years earlier at Tektronix, and they had the ARPANET. And I would, at Tektronix, the internet in those days, the entire content of the internet would transfer via modem every night to the big server. And I would read all of the new content of the entire internet. And it'd take me about a half hour, maybe 45 minutes.
And
But that
you
was a
didn't
good.
keep up that?
Huh?
You
No,
can't do that today,
I
right?
dropped that. No, nope. That kind of, and it was exciting to watch the internet unfold from its very early days in the 80s. There were no graphics. It was just all text and transfers. So to send an email, it would take a week to send an email to the East Coast, right?
Oh,
I remember
wow.
the day when yeah, and you would have to, usually it wouldn't make it because it would go from one computer to the next computer to the next. And then there were maps that were downloaded every night that had maps of how you send email from one point to the other. But there'd be a computer that would be down. So you would have to route your email around it by defining all of the hops that each computer, they'd pass through in order to get email out to the East Coast. So it was you had to be an engineer to send email back in those days.
Wow, that's
It was,
crazy.
it was really fun and exciting, and it's amazing how things have changed, of course. But there was in '88, I found an LDS discussion group, an email. It's called a list server, an email list server, and it was set up by David Anderson and Lynn Anderson, who, if you want to interview somebody and get some great history, you want to track them down because they created this thing, and we called it the Internet First Ward, and we would talk about everything. It was awesome. It was a really good community environment, and of course that helped me learn more about the church, including some more of the controversial aspects of the church. And as I continued to learn and learn and learn, uh, my shelf broke, as they say, right? My traditional testimony collapsed because I had too many variables that did not add up with the way I had been taught that church was, in this very black and white paradigm that everybody grew up learning about it. And that was very difficult. It was a crisis. I had been married for 6 months. I thought my wife just might leave me. And I also thought naively, I'm probably the only person in the church that knows there's this problem and that hasn't left the church, and I just didn't know what to do. And of course, in those days, there was nobody. Today, there's a million resources for people who are questioning. There were none back then. So I
Was it just
began.
the entirety of the shelf, or was there anything in particular that led to the breaking of the shelf?
I mean, it was the weight of the shelf was huge. I think the straw that was on there was when I learned about B.H. Roberts' studies of the Book of Mormon, and he had found parallels to Ethan Smith's view of the Hebrews, and there were and I saw that it was an actual general authority that was struggling and trying to come to grips and had found this problem, and and I guess maybe that was like, I thought, well, they all know all this stuff and they probably all have answers, but then I read B.H. Roberts didn't have the answers, and I think that was the tipping point. But that was just one of a whole bunch of things, right? That seemed to be the catalyst, I think.
Did you find
Um,
like the Dialogue magazine or something?
I'm glad you asked that question. Let me tell you how I found dialogue. So I began hiking up partway up Mount Olympus in Salt Lake Valley, and I would pray my guts out. I mean, I was at my wit's end. I didn't know what to do. I was so alone, and it was a tough time. I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and then somebody pointed me to Dialogue, Journal of Mormon Thought, which is probably the premier academic publication about Mormon studies. And I found a copy at Weller's bookstore in downtown Salt Lake on Main Street. it's moved now, but yeah. And I read in there an article by Carl Sandburg, and it was on the Book of Abraham, and it talked about the he proposed the catalyst theory, which has actually come back. People are talking about that now. The church actually has that in their gospel topics essays as a way to explain why the translation of the Egyptian papyri doesn't match the Book of Abraham. And I'm simplifying there's a lot of complexity in that argument, but I'm simplifying. He said, hey, he says, maybe it was a Jungian thing. Carl Jung, the great psychologist, he maybe when he saw these characters on the papyri that he tapped into the collective unconscious out there and in an archetypal way, and these characters spoke to him, and his revelatory self wrote the Book of Mormon text. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. But what really struck me was, here is a Latter-day Saint who knows about the problems and is completely honest and forthright about them, but is trying to grapple with it and say, hey, maybe this is how to understand that. And I'm like, where are these people? I found one. Here's one. I need these people. Well, I then went to my first Sunstone symposium, and there they were. And at the end of that symposium, I was, I had tears running down my face, and I had found my people. I'd found people who were intellectually honest and had goodwill and were trying to work this all out. So
And
that was a big for me.
Was the catalyst theory considered heretical by mainstream Mormonism?
Well, I don't know that anybody was even reading it. Who reads dialogue back then? Professors and I don't know, a few people, but I had never even heard of dialogue. Most people had no idea what dialogue was. So nobody even knew about it to discuss it. But today the church, that they promote that as a possible answer to the Book of Abraham problems. Well, so I started going to Sunstone and loved it, and while I was going, I these icons emerged that I grew to tremendously admire, and I think of particularly Levina Fielding Anderson, Eugene England, and Michael Quinn, and they became heroes in my eyes. And then, was it September 93 or 94? The September 6th happened.
Yeah.
And they excommunicated my heroes. The people, like, these people are doing it right. They're honest, they're rigorous, they have goodwill, and the church exed them. And oh boy. So that was not helpful, right? Very, very unhelpful. So I don't know. So, but I plodded through. My wife wanted me to be active, and I continued to be active. I was a real pain in the butt in Sunday school and priesthood meeting, raising my hand and asking tough questions. I was angry, just really angry at the whole situation. I wanted honesty and integrity, and what I was getting was Orwellian smoothing over and dismissing or just not about. And to be fair, my ward members had no idea. And to be fair to the church leadership, they didn't know what do you do with this?
Right.
I mean, they're literally doing the best they can. It's just a difficult circumstance. So yeah, so that was a big experience. Yeah. So let's see what I got to look at.
So are we on like chronologies?
Oh yeah. So thank you. Yes. So I started. I was a computer guy, and I thought, to understand church history, I would like to have a really good chronology, so I can when somebody starts talking about, well, this happened and it was in 1837 and then this was in 1842, I'd hear all these dates, and I wanted to see how they laid out over time. So I got a copy of an issue of BYU Studies. The whole issue is a giant chronology of the life of Joseph Smith.
Oh wow!
So I pulled that into a file in Linux, Unix, Ron, and then I put a way to put a date. I unified the date so I could run the sort command on it as needed. Then I pulled in Michael Quinn's 2 chronologies that came in his 2 hierarchy volumes, Origins of Power and Extensions of Power, which are really phenomenal chronologies. I pulled those in, and then I went and found the Encyclopedia of Mormonism had put a chronology in there, and that was a good chronology. And so I put all those in, and I sorted it all, and I had a tremendous chronology, and I can now talk to people, and it looked like I knew what I was talking about, because I could
Do you
see
feel like
when things happen.
Do you feel like the chronology helps contextualize some things?
Absolutely. And here's this is an insight I may have gained a little bit later, but I believe Mormonism is continually evolving, and it's important to know not what Joseph Smith said, but you've got to say, but when did he say it? If he said something in 1832 and he said something in 1842, there's a world of difference in his development and thought process, and he's thinking about things very differently 10 years later. And so you have to know when it is if you really want to, and you have to understand it's all evolving. Or another way to put it, line upon line, right? Or continuing revelation. Those are other ways to describe that same phenomenon. So I built this chronology. Well, then I found another chronology, and I thought, I'm going to pop that one in too. And then I found another one, and I popped it in. And before long, I have, I now have a chronology that's got, I think it's somewhere around 150,000 items in it.
Wow.
It's got diary entries of a lot of the apostles and first presidency members. It's got meeting minutes of first presidency and of the apostles. And it's got every chronology that looks useful to me that I could find. I've piped into that thing. And so I have this massive, and I guarantee it's the largest chronology that there is about church history.
Is there a way to get it on the web? Is there a way to get it on the web so that everybody can access it someday?
Maybe. I don't know. What I have done is I have culled through it and trimmed what I think is the best of, and removed some duplications. And I have made kind of a subset database. And I wrote a program, a shell script, Ron, that every day I have a cron job, wakes up and it queries my database, and it looks for everything that occurred at 5-year increments on that date. And then it emails it to a blog called Today in Mormon History. And then I have some other things that feed it out to Twitter and to Facebook and to Instagram and other things. So there's a thing, and if people want to check it out, go to todayinmormonhistory.com. And Ron, I mean, you've been on there.
I have. I've learned some really fascinating things from that. I'm really impressed with that.
It's got some good stuff, and it's not I didn't create the materials, but I just found them and aggregated it all together, and I disseminate it, and I think it's very useful. And so now, sometimes I'll have a friend and they'll say, like, for example, Lindsay Hansen Park wanted to do a piece on the Word of Wisdom. So I cranked out this chronology, and I looked for keywords like tea, coffee, tobacco, all the Word of Wisdom keywords, created this gigantic, like 80-page chronology of everything that everybody's ever had to say about any of these things, and gave it to her. And then I think she did a 2-part. It might have been Year of Polygamy. I can't remember. And I've helped other people. The researching this person. I say, yeah, let me. I can help you out with that. And so I'll generate a chronology for them. So, and for my own research. So it's enabled me, who has no historical training, to be able to use technology to make it look like I know what I'm talking about, and and so I can write articles and give presentations and stuff, and because I have this technological tool that I put together. So I
provide a link
to the today in Mormonhistory.com. Yep, that's it. And and if people are researching something and they want some help, reach out and probably lend hand if it's an easy query, something I can query without too much time.
And there are other things like the Mormon History Examiner.
Yes. So I began writing. I had the urge to begin writing stuff. So I started out as there was a thing called examiner.com, which is defunct now, but I started writing articles, just little news articles. And the thing was, somehow they had to connect. So when you go to Google, these articles would pop up. They'd show up on Google, and they get a lot of readership. And so I did that for a while, and then I was invited to participate in the Mormon studies, the Mormon Media Studies Symposium at BYU, and that was my first presentation that I gave. I met Michael Marquardt, and we became friends, and he mentored me, told me how to do footnotes, and if I was researching something, he'd say, "Hey, I've got some material for you. Make sure you do this," and he would steer me when I'd go wrong. And he's an awesome guy. And we're good friends.
What year did you meet Michael?
Well, it's probably been somewhere between 10 to 15 years ago, I would say. And
I met him a couple years ago, and he knew that I was from the just south of Oakland, California, and he said, first thing he said for me is like, "I grew up in San Francisco," and I was like shocked, because like I didn't want to talk about that. I want to talk about Mormon history, but it was fun that he knew that. I guess let's see, Joe Geisner brought us together. And so Joe told him that I was from Joe's area in the Bay Area, and so Mike wanted to spring that on me as like, we're homeboys, right?
Yeah,
we're homies.
Yeah, that's great.
And Mike is awesome.
Well, yeah, he is. He's a really good guy, very generous with his time. And he calls, we talk probably once every 2 weeks or something, I'd say, and just, what's going on? So we've become good friends.
So you did
he helped
Sunstone presentation with him last year, didn't you?
Mike and I, for quite a few years now, we always present papers together.
Okay.
He's awesome, because about December, he's like, "So Claire, we got to start thinking about Sunstone. What do you want to talk about?" And I'm like, he says, "I think I want to talk about this." I'm like, "Mike, that's like in 7 months, but he's so on the ball, and so he's so in fact, we were talking earlier this week about what we will present coming up, So we've been doing that. I don't know how many years, 7 or 8, 9 years now. We always share the same session and give a historical thing.
And if you go to his presentations, he has a stack of handouts for people to read.
Yep, and he's already talking about what handouts he's going to have at Sunstone. So
nice.
Yeah, he's a very organized, thorough person. Yeah. Well, and Mike helped me do my first Sunstone presentation. I was terrified at the idea of presenting at Sunstone, and I got some encouragement from Mike and others. You ought to do something. So I did I was looking at Aller Cowdery's rod, divination rod, and how that was referenced in the Joseph Smith papers, which had just been published. And there were different versions of that revelation, actually 4 different versions of the D&C 8 that had very curious changes about the rod. And I'm like, I caught on fire with that. Mike helped me. And so I submitted a proposal. I got accepted by Mary Ellen Robinson, who was the chair of Sunstone at the time. And this terrified me. Mary Ellen contacted me and says, "Hey, I've got a respondent that's going to respond to your paper." I'm like, "Oh, who is it?" And she said, "It's Michael Quinn." And I just about died. I'm like, I was speechless. That just terrified me. He's the guy, right? There's no no greater historian, and I felt so inadequate already, and to have him respond to my paper, I was terrified. But I presented, and I was shaking during my presentation, and then Mike was very nice and kind and didn't destroy me like he could have, But that was my initial Sunstone presentation, and then I have participated in Sunstone, I think, every year since then, almost every year. And I've also done, the Mormon MHA, Mormon History Association, and the John Whitmer Conference. And last year I did the Juanita Brooks Conference. And my next paper is going to be at the Journal of Mormon Polygamy Conference that's coming up, which is kind of a controversial new enterprise. We'll see if it takes off and continues to publish or not. I don't know what'll happen, but I'm gonna present a paper there. So that's anyway. That's how
that focuses on the historicity of Joseph Smith's polygamy, whether he was or Brigham. It started with Brigham. Is that what it is?
It is more broad than that. It's about any topic, but that's how it came into being. So there's Michelle Bradley Stone, who is the
Brady, right?
primary intellectual behind that movement, I would say, and Cheryl Bruno, who is a very good historian, and they've become good friends. And together Michelle kind of got ousted from the John Whitmer Historical Conference last year. She had been accepted, and then she got disinvited, which I don't think they should have done that, but they did. No. And there are powers that be behind the scenes, and that's what happened. So they said, "All right, we'll create our own conference, our own journal." And,
that's the middle of March.
Yes, it's in March. I've got the date. It take me a minute, but I can look up the date.
And I actually did a show with Cheryl and Michelle, and I'll include that a link in our description for people to go check that out. And so they're
people
really excited about it.
Yes, I'm looking really quick, and I'm probably not going to find it. It's sometime in March, and you can Google it. It's on the March 21st and 22nd. So right at spring, right at the equinox. So some people are interested. So anyway, that's kind of I got into Mormon studies and
one thing we might have skipped over is what is withoutend.org?
Oh, yeah. So I blogged at a few places. I did create the Today Mormon History. It's not really a traditional blog. It's more just data. But I did the Examiner thing, and then I created my own blog called Mormon Chronicles, and I published quite regularly for maybe about 10 years. And then I kind of moved on to other things, but it's a good history of that period of time, I think, because I tried to talk about every important thing that occurred during that time frame. And then I started Chris Carroll Smith created a blog called withoutend.org, which is now defunct, but I blogged on that for a while, and I really enjoyed that. Yeah, so that's my blogging experience, Yeah. So I've been active this whole time, and I have throughout the decades have been thinking and assimilating, and all this has been sloshing around in my head, and I think I have a different understanding, much less black and white. And so I am a cafeteria Mormon now. I I participate in things that uh, that don't make me upset, that I feel I can positively contribute to. I love my ward members. I make constructive comments. People really like what I have to say. I try to, I have new ways of looking at things because I've spent all this time studying all this stuff, and people seem to really like what I have to say. And every once in a while, I'll speak out on a social issue, like the LGBT community's relationship with the church, and I'm progressive minded, and I look forward to the day when there are gay couples sitting side by side and they feel welcome. I think and I express that whenever the topic comes up. I try to find a very tactful way to communicate that so that people hopefully go, okay, well, that's the way to look at it. That's not a bad way or something. That's my goal, is to be tactful, gentle, and maybe a bit hopefully persuasive with people. So yeah,
That's
I'm an
right.
active
Blacks were
member of
denied
the church.
access to temple blessings for 150 years, and hopefully it doesn't take that long for the same thing for the LGBTQ.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I've told this story in Sunday school, that when blacks were denied, people would get in trouble for expressing that they ought to have the priesthood. It was frowned on to agitate about that, and then Elder Holland, when he heard the news, he pulled over and cried of joy. He was so overjoyed. And then I'll say, I think someday that's going to happen with gay people in our church, and it'll be a joyful thing. And that's how I try to present it. Right? That's non-confrontive, and it shows you that there are positive changes that occur, and that the apostles welcome change. And anyway, so that's kind of how I speak at church.
Okay.
About controversial things. Yeah. So
right. Yeah, it's a delicate balance.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. And I love the church. But it's kind of like a dysfunctional family. There's some great stuff, and there's some dysfunction also, right? And
Yep.
I love it when the dysfunction gets rooted out, and I try
There's
to
a couple
address
of crazy uncles up
a couple
there.
of crazy uncles, and I celebrate the good. And most of the material that is presented is about loving your neighbor, and man, I'm 100% behind that, and that's
Right.
primarily what is taught these days, and I think that is awesome.
That's right. There's supposed to be good news of the gospel, and sometimes people twist that into hate and rejection, but it's really about inclusiveness and love, loving one another, loving your enemies, and that is a good thing. And thank you for your work doing that. We all have family and friends that are attending in various levels of activity, and we all want the church to be a healthy and happy place for them. And so thanks a lot, and thanks for coming on our show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun. Yes, I really appreciate the invitation.
So we're a stepping stone to Mormon stories. So John DeLynn will probably call you soon. No, I'm just kidding.
John DeLynn was on my mission. I used to go to his house. He
wow.
was younger than I was, and we baptized a couple that was business associates with John's dad. And I
Wow.
actually went to a Mormon Stories event where John Delin's dad was, and we shook hands and embraced, and like, oh, it's good to see you. And actually, I have a guitar right over in the corner there that was given to me in John Delin's house by that guy that we baptized, and I still
Oh,
play that
nice.
guitar.
That's
Wow.
cool.
Yeah.
That is awesome. So yeah, in a couple of months we'll do another hour show where we do an expose on young John Delin. So everybody can look forward to that. What
That's
John
right.
was
I've
like
got the
as a young
Holy
man.
crap! You have no idea.
He's about 10 years younger.
Probably, yeah, something like that. He would just some punk kid come running in and talk to his mom and dad. I'm hungry and I want some food, or I don't know, I can't remember. And then he'd run
I think
off.
it was
I didn't
pre
hardly at all.
Aaronic priesthood John Delin, we'll say.
Something like
He
that.
probably was tall back then, even.
Yeah, not as tall as he is now. Yes.
Right, but still for his age, he probably was taller than everybody.
Yeah.
But anyway, thanks, Masterpiece, for helping me out here today.
Thanks for having me on and helping out. I love meeting Clair and getting to know him more. I've met him at Sunstone, and I've really enjoyed his Today in Mormon History stuff. So I'm glad to be here to get to know him a little better.
And so we like
Masterpiece.
We like Masterpiece when he shows up on Rebecca Biblioteca and Landon Show, Mormonish, and other various places. And so everybody have a great rest of the year, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Thank you.